I will never forget flipping through a 3rd edition D&D monster book and seeing this thing for the first time. I truly had no idea what I was looking at, and after reading the creature's introduction, I was even less sure. Sharns embody magical chaos. They might rule the world if they cared, and if they could put their minds to it, but their agenda seems more sophisticated than mere rulership. What? Welcome to Monster of the Week, the show where we exhume D&D's weirdest and most fascinating monsters, talk about why they're cool, and give them 5th edition updates complete with new art. This week we're talking about the Sharn, and I gotta say, this might be one of the weirdest creatures I have ever covered on this channel. I mean, just look at it. It's an amorphous black mass of fluid that appears to have 3 heads, each of which have a wide toothy maw and a pair of nostrils. But I'll tell you what it doesn't have: eyes, or ears for that matter. It's also got 3 arms, each of which split into 3 forearms that end in clawed hands with eyeballs in each palm. They also wield weapons in each of their weird little paws, and they're one of the most significant creatures in the entire history of Dungeons & Dragons lore, so yeah, alright, let's start at the beginning. Back in 1991, the average cost for a single family home in America was $147,200 big ones, and in the basement of those affordable homes, nerds were getting down with one of the sickest campaign settings ever printed, the ruins of Undermountain. If you weren't playing D&D or alive in 1991 and you got introduced to the game with 5th edition, you might be more familiar with the 5e Dungeon of the Mad Mage adventure, which is basically a truncated version of this classic setting. And yes, I am referring to this dungeon crawl as a setting because that's what it is. The original ruins of Undermountain contains over 350 rooms per level with 3 levels. There are like a dozen published adventures that take place just in the dungeon. And there's an expansion box set with even more levels to go through. There are also places where the dungeon connects to the edges of the map so that the DM can add whatever they might want there, or just say it's a dead end if they'd rather not. So if you want to just play Dungeons and Dungeons, this is the setting for you. The whole place was built so that you and your friends could spend years dungeon crawling without ever seeing the light of day. And that's rad. Anyways, in the original box set, there is a bestiary of new creatures, and in that bestiary is where we find the absolute insanity that is this week's creature, the Sharn. Their original artwork is, of course, in the classic black and white 2nd edition D&D style, and the design looks pretty much unchanged when compared to their 3rd edition counterpart. They're also described as being an enigma, little understood by sages. The ecology section does tell us that they reproduce by budding, and that they are described as being sophisticated, far-sighted creatures. They've got an interest in magic, planar travel, and they live in some kind of clan structure, which seems to work towards strange and esoteric goals. However, they don't really seem to care much at all about the affairs of mortals, which is pretty typical for an aberrant creature like this, but they super don't care. Whatever the Sharn are up to in their small clan-like structures, they really do their best to avoid mortals at all costs. The book even includes a quote from a human sage by the name of Orblin Zesper, who called the Sharn the Great Aloof Ones. So much old D&D lore is just stuff that made it from the game table of various designers and world builders who worked on Dungeons & Dragons, so I gotta assume that Orblin Zesper was a player in one of Ed Greenwood's games or something, and the Great Aloof Ones was the joke of the night when their adventuring party first encountered a Sharn. Anyways, the Sharn clan in Undermountain is described as worshipping the Drowned Queen, who is maybe some kind of aboleth or other ancient aberrant force, though it is made clear that other Sharn clans worship a variety of gods, including gods from the human, elven, and goblin pantheons. So basically, we got some weird little goopy guys who look insane and have some kind of interest in magic. Great. However, in November of 1991, with the release of the now iconic Anarok setting expansion to the Forgotten Realms, the Sharn would come to fulfill one of the most important roles in D&D history and show how truly powerful they are. I went over the whole history of the Anarok Desert in my video about the Faerim, but the short version of this story is that there were a bunch of wizards living in awesome floating cities, and because they did magic too good, they were assaulted by a monstrous group of creatures called Faerim that looked like a windsock if it had 4 arms, rows of teeth, and a bad attitude. As masters of magic themselves, the Faerim pulled the wizard cities out of the sky and transformed a huge region of the world into a desert with death magic and by doing a ton of other uncool stuff. This, however, is where the Sharn come in. Apparently, they were watching all of this go down and they said to themselves, well, This seems pretty terrible. The Faerûm are poised to mess up the source of all magic on the material plane, maybe permanently, and we can't have that, because we too are magic fellas who like doing magic things. So the Sharn appeared to the wizards and were like, hey guys, yeah, I know we look like scary, horrible monsters to you, but what if we helped you win this war against the Windsocks? And then they did that. The Sharn single-handedly imprisoned 99% of all Faerûm inside of a magic bubble, which they can never leave. Nobody knows what kind of magic they use to do this, and it is expressly stated that the Sharn can use magic in ways no other living creature knows how to do. So, basically they prevented the Faerûm from annihilating all of the Netherese, and then probably just conquering the material plane, and they did that in like a day. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but they're insanely powerful. And this is why they are described as being so powerful. They could probably conquer everything if they wanted to, they just don't want to. So they're good guys, right? Well, not exactly. The Sharn are about as chaotic neutral gets. They care about preserving the forces of magic in the world and ensuring that their access to magic is never tampered with or destroyed in some way, but they're not actually out here doing good deeds. In fact, our main man, Elminster, specifically warns that people stay the hell away from any Sharn they see, because Sharn avoid contact with mortals if they can help it. If you ever inadvertently discover a Sharn, you should just leave it alone, because it probably doesn't want anything to do with you. So why are they so dangerous? Well, one of the Sharn's signature abilities is that it can open portals between space and time, which it can attack through. Using these portals to its advantage allows the Sharn to slash, stab, and bite from a great distance away. Also, every one of them houses multiple sentient consciousnesses that can all act independently of one another, thus allowing it to cast multiple spells in the same round. Oh yeah, did I not mention that? Within every Sharn is a collection of minds, a collective, if you will. But unlike most collectives in sci-fi and fantasy, the Sharn collective, while all grouped together, are individual personalities. This is why when they speak to another creature out loud, not using their telepathy, they speak in the same words, using 3 different voices. They often speak in unison because they are one creature after all, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they talk over each other and even try to argue. It's a real mess in there, but hey, they get to cast multiple spells on the same turn, which if you've ever encountered that before, can be terrifying. The 3rd edition monster entry gives us a bit more insight into how a Sharn operates. The true form of a Sharn is actually just a tar-like amorphous pool of goo. They are literally just a puddle writhing with all the different minds that exist within the body. The place a Sharn clan calls home is usually just a large pool of this black goo, where they all pour themselves together and communicate with incredible speed using telepathy. To an outside observer, a Sharn clan might just look like a swimming pool full of black goo, but that's what's going on inside. And it's really intense. Their society is a complex network of political intrigue, ladder climbing, and power struggles. The Sharn relentlessly debate and discuss with one another over issues of ideology and philosophy at breakneck pace. They will sometimes do nothing but focus inward for extended periods of time, sometimes spending years in this state before they are disturbed by an outside force, or simply decide it's time to take their shape and venture away from the clan for some reason. The Sharn would appear in several other adventures and source books over the years. However, in March of 2009, we would get some of the craziest Sharn lore yet. Unsurprisingly, from 4th edition. Dragon Magazine 373 has an article titled Ecology of the Sharn by Brian R. James. Not only does this piece give us a bunch of new Sharn artwork, but it also provides a bunch of new lore and information about these strange creatures. I know 4E lore is pretty hit or miss with a lot of folks, but regardless of how you feel about it, getting 9 full pages of lore, game stats, and art is awesome for any monster, and I wish we got more stuff like this from modern D&D monster books. This version of the Sharn's lore doesn't undo any of the other stuff we already know about them, other than the fact it directly states they don't typically worship any gods, and that's because they come from a place that has no gods. People often assume that as weird, semi-formless aberrations, the Sharn are likely from the domain of tentacles and slurping noises known as the Far Realm, but this is not the case, and the truth is so much weirder. The world the Sharn come from is not another plane, but a parallel world. They come from a different reality, where the universe is more or less the same as the Forgotten Realms, with one teensy-tiny difference. That difference being, in the Sharn's reality, the chained god, Tharizdun, was never chained. The gods of the Sharn's reality lost the Dawn War against the Primordials, which is a whole can of worms we don't have time to get into today, but basically what that means is all the gods as we know them were either dead or too weakened to stop Tharizdun from enacting his mad final scheme to unmake the universe. In this reality, the sun slowly collapses into darkness and the world is silent aside from great storms of fire and lightning that sweep the bones of every civilization to ever exist. All that remains is dust, decay, and the Sharn. By consuming every living thing in the universe, Tharizdun shed his divinity and underwent a grand apotheosis, becoming something greater than a god, described only as something perverse and outside the known. The Sharn were the only thinking beings left when Tharizdun abandoned this universe. They are the sentient remnants of everything the mad god had destroyed, nothing more than a collection of merged consciousnesses. They could only watch and wait as reality slowly crumbled around them, and over time this writhing blob of black sentient fluid began to explore this dying landscape. As it stumbled upon more and more remnants of the past world, it began to catalog everything it found. To speed the process, the mass of intermingled minds split itself into many different beings, what we now know as the Sharn. Within just a few years, the Sharn had amassed an incredible amount of knowledge and magic items, which they used to conduct a ritual that might allow them to escape their doomed universe. And it worked. This ritual brought them from their reality into ours, spitting them out through a portal deep within the Underdark. The Sharn are not a hive mind, but they are a collective consciousness that shares the same goal: to prevent the total destruction of their home. They haven't exactly been able to fix anything, but they have definitely put a pause on the apocalypse. At least for now. And this is why they generally don't want to interfere with mortals. They have little to no interest in this reality. They are simply interested in protecting sources of magic so that they can continue to preserve their own, and maybe someday even reverse what Tharizdun has done there. So when the Faerun were doing all the magic warmongering / killing the planet, this is why the Sharn intervene. This is also why their magic is so potent. They are literally using magic from another reality, and they cast spells using arcane rituals that might not even be possible for someone from this reality. But if you want magic someone from this reality can use, look no further than Guild Stew. Guild Stew is a system-agnostic TTRPG campaign manager in the palm of your hand, or both hands if you use a tablet, or on your computer even. It's everywhere. This thing lets you build collaborative session notes everyone can access. It can store your character sheets, game chats, private notes, and everything else you need to play any tabletop game out there. You can also use it as a VTT to play the game itself with all of your stuff fully integrated into whatever you're doing. Somehow it manages to do all of that with an interface that actually looks nice and isn't a confusing mess. It turns out you can have both. What a world. And I haven't even mentioned the data, the beautiful, beautiful data. Guild Stew tracks all of the meta information about how you, the player, play your characters, and will show you the type of decisions you make and the kind of luck you have, along with basically anything else that is trackable in various graphs and charts, which some of you might not care about, but I know there's a sizable chunk of people like me watching this right now who let out an audible gasp. I also know a bunch of you watching are game designers and homebrew enthusiasts yourself, and Guild Stew offers you a platform to sell your stuff without giving up any of the rights to your intellectual property, all within the program itself. Easy peasy, squeeze a lemon. There's so much more about this program that looks amazing, from rewriting rules to creating custom dice to mic and video overlays. It's all here, gang. This is the one. From D&D 5.5 to Pathfinder to Morkborg, you can do it all here. So if you want to take a look at what Guild Stew is cooking up, follow the link in the description down below, take a look for yourself. And if you like what you see, be sure to click that button to get notified when Guild Stew goes live on Kickstarter on September 30th. The alpha is planned to go live in November for backers, so if you want to secure your spot and help create something that I think is going to be a true game changer, check it out. Thank you to Guild Stew for bringing us here this week to talk about what I can only describe as a three-headed goop monster from Hellworld. Speaking of which, did you know that Sharn is also a place? Yeah, Sharn is the name of a city in the Eberron campaign setting. That's got nothing to do with our monster, but oh boy does it make looking up information about this thing on the internet super annoying. Anyways, let's talk three-headed turkey. The Sharn have had a pretty consistent set of abilities throughout their career as a monster created by an insane man. The big difference is that in 4E, they don't worship gods, so they don't really have cleric spells available to them. I chose to ignore that entirely and give them cleric spells anyways, because I think it's interesting for reasons we'll get into, but also because if you want to use the Sharn as godless beings, you can just re-flavor their divine spells as coming from another source that isn't a god. You could even make the argument that the Sharn themselves carry a small amount of divinity because of their connection with Tharizdun if you want. More on that later. The thing that I love about the Sharn from 2nd and 3rd edition is that they can cast 2 spells every round, and those 2 spells come from different spell lists. In true 3rd edition fashion, they cast spells as 7th level sorcerers and 5th level clerics, or a 7th level divine soul if you're looking at one of the later books that has an updated stat block. We certainly don't have time to talk about what that means, but the bottom line is they cast divine and arcane spells from 2 different lists. So I did something on their stat block I have never seen in a 5th edition stat block, which is I gave them the spellcasting action twice. My Sharn have arcane spellcasting and divine spellcasting. These 2 actions work exactly the same way as all spellcasting actions do, except they have 2 pools of spells available to them. This is important because when the Sharn uses its multi-attack, it can make 3 rend attacks with its little claws, and it can replace 2 of those attacks with a single use of each spellcasting action. In other words, a Sharn can claw you, cast lightning bolt, and cast spirit guardians all in the same turn. Youch! Speaking of the Sharn's claws, it can use them not only in melee, but also from a range. Sharns can open up a small rift in space that it and only it can reach through to claw at someone who's up to 60 feet away from them. In the original version of this monster, these rifts were physical objects with their own initiative and movement speed that the GM had to track and move around, which is cool in theory, but also the idea of tracking these portals, especially if there are multiple Sharn in a combat, seems needlessly slow, so instead I just left all of that out, made it flavor text, and gave their rend attack a ranged option. If you're the type of DM who loves the idea of micromanaging a bunch of portals and their positions on the grid with their own movement, you're probably playing 4th edition, in which case you don't need these stats, and if you're not, you should really check out 4th edition. It's a great combat simulator if that's your thing. The other area where I tried to add some efficiency to the Sharn stat block actually required a few changes. Sharn always receive the benefits of a haste spell. It's not perma-cast on them, they just get those benefits as if it were, which is cool and fine, but having to cross-reference a spell to make sure you're not forgetting anything is annoying. So instead of giving them that, I just gave them all the stuff that haste gives you, but built into the sheet. This is why they have cutting action as a bonus action, this is why they have an AC of 19, this is why their fly speed is 80 feet, and this is why they have expertise in dexterity saving throws. Fun fact, not at all related to this creature by the way, the spell component for haste is licorice root, a thing commonly used throughout history as a laxative. Anyways, shitty spells aside, Sharns also get evasion and magic resistance, as well as a trait called unique form that prevents them from shapeshifting. Something kind of weird and fun about this trait also is that it prevents all other creatures from shapeshifting into the form of a Sharn. So no matter how high level you are, you're not him. You can never be him.
You're not that guy, pal, trust me. You're not that guy.
A thing I chalk up to the fact that they come from an alternate reality, so magic in our world just simply can't replicate the physiology of a Sharn. Sharns are also tough to kill permanently on account of the regeneration, which functions as long as they have 1 hit point, and you know, their ability to cast just so many spells. So the Sharn I created is a CR 10 creature, and this is meant to serve as a sort of typical example of any Sharn you might come across. But keep in mind, as a highly intelligent species, the spells on a Sharn's list are subject to change. Any individual Sharn might be way more powerful than this, or even the same level of powerful, but just different. So feel free to customize their magic to suit your needs. But as far as actually using one of these bad boys in a D&D game, how the hell do we even begin to do that? Well, for starters, you or one of your buddies might want to become a Sharn. No, I know they can't polymorph into a Sharn. I mean literally become a member of the insane Sharn posse, as in they're one of the minds inside of it. The only way for the Sharn to reproduce is by absorbing new minds into their collective consciousness. They never do this by force, however. In fact, they actually have a pretty strict acceptance criteria. They are aggressively doing their own thing, so becoming a part of a Sharn's collective is like getting invited to partake in a membership at an exclusive country club. You don't just have to be an accomplished magic user, you also need to be someone the Sharn feel aligned with morally and ethically. Most importantly, you can't be an annoying asshole, because ain't nobody trying to spend eternity with some douchebag wreaking havoc in their mind palace. Now this could be an interesting story beat for a player character or even an NPC. Gaining access to all that knowledge and becoming so much more, but also losing something of yourself in the process, is pretty interesting. Something incredibly ominous mentioned in the 4E article as well is that Tharizdun, the Chained God, immediately took notice of the Sharn when they crossed the threshold into this reality. On the one hand, the Sharn appeared to be of him, but simultaneously not of him. This paradox is exactly the kind of thing that the Mad God loves to indulge in, so naturally, he chose to reach out to the Sharns across the multiverse, appearing in dreams and whispers. The Sharn might be the only living creatures in the multiverse that can actually comprehend the madness whispered by Tharizdun, and thus far, they've just kind of left him on red. I mean, their version of him is literally the reason their home got utterly destroyed. However, he's also the only reason they exist to begin with. Not much more is given here, but honestly, we can do a ton with this as it is. Maybe the Sharn are actually working towards releasing Tharizdun in our realm. They could be doing it unknowingly, as the Chained God is able to subtly influence them. They could be doing it deliberately, seeing Tharizdun as the only way to make more Sharn in this world in a grand way before moving on to the next reality. They could even be actively fighting against it, trying to protect this realm from Tharizdun so the same tragedy doesn't repeat itself here. All valid options, and there might even be different factions of Sharn that are working towards different goals related to this. Something else I love about the Sharn is that they frequently spend years in total silence, at least to the outside world. They can go decades just laying still in a pool with the rest of their clan, appearing as a lake of black liquid, completely motionless. All the while within the Sharn goop, the minds of many Sharns are engaging in political intrigue and fierce debate with no external stimuli, only taking form when they need to actively work on something or when disturbed. So if you ever come across a pool of weird black goop in a dungeon, it could be a black pudding, or it could be the minds of a civilization unwoven and reformed as a collective of Sharns. You never know. The Sharn can also be a great bailout option for a huge threat such as the Faerun. If ever some force arises that wants to see the universe destroyed or magic harmed or stifled in some way, the Sharn would be sure to try and stop them. So maybe the party has to find a Sharn collective in some remote location to plead for their help in order to stop an arcane catastrophe. Or maybe it's not even relevant to the Sharn's interest, but the party is willing to trade a powerful magic item for their help. And I mean, hey, if nothing else, a Sharn can make for a great random encounter in the depths of a mega dungeon. As always, if you do want to use this creature, link to the description down below is a Google document which contains everything you will need to successfully bring this creature to your game table. And if you are one of my lovely patrons over on the Dungeon Dad Patreon, you can find the high-res PDF stat block, which is all the same game information, but is presented in a more fanciful way as my way of saying thank you so much to the folks who throw some money my way each month and help me keep on doing what I'm doing. This sincerely would not be possible without the folks over on Patreon. If you're not already a patron, consider checking it out. It's a couple bucks a month. You get some fun stat blocks, and once in a while I do polls over there too to dictate what videos I'm going to work on next. And speaking of patrons, I gotta give a massive shout out to our randomly selected Patron of the Week. Thank you so much to Drago Wolf for both the draconic and lycanthropic amount of support you throw my way each month. And thank you for watching. As always, if there's a monster from an older edition of D&D or a movie you like, a cool comic book, a video game, another role-playing game, let me know in the comments down below or the Dungeon Dad Discord. And who knows, you might just see it show up in a future episode of Monster of the Week. Also, I just want to give a huge shout out to everyone who came out to Gen Con. I apologize, there was no video last week. I was at Gen Con, a big old convention, super busy. My flight was very delayed on the way home, so unfortunately, I was not able to get a video out until now, but I had a ton of fun, and if you came up to me and said hi just at the convention, or you came to the signing, or played one of my games, whatever, if we got to interact, thank you so much for coming out to see me. It was a pleasure. I met so many cool people, and hey, a bunch of us walked away wearing this bad boy. By a bunch of us, I mean a bunch of you guys. We almost sold out of t-shirts, this one and our dad stat block t-shirt, which personally I think is ridiculous, and that's why I made it. I don't make serious things, except for the zine I made. That was kind of serious. I mean, it's a little bit silly too, but all in all, for those of you who came out and said hi, or anyone who bought one of my shirts or zine at Gen Con, thank you so much. It means the most. All of that stuff goes such a long way in supporting me. And hey, if you weren't at Gen Con and you want to pick up a t-shirt or a copy of the zine I made last year, the link's in the description down below to my merch shop, and that stuff's all there too. Anyways, I feel like I've ranted long enough. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Till then.